Big losses for the Conservatives, gains for Labour, Liberal Democrats, Greens and Independents. But with 3/4 of results still to come, we're with you for the next 4.5 hours to give you the verdict of voters in these local elections in England. This is a Politics Live election special. Joining me today, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Andrea Leadsom, Shadow Health Minister and Labour MP Liz Kendall, Daily Mirror political editor John Stevens and former Brexit Party candidate and director of the Equiano project Inaya Folarin Imam. On the programme today.
We're obviously very, very disappointed. We did expect a change, a slight change, but certainly not the whirlwind gains that Labour have made tonight.
Tories lick their wounds as their losses mount. The Prime Minister puts on a brave face.
I'm not detecting any massive groundswell of movement towards the Labour Party or excitement for their agenda. What people want us to do is focus on their priorities.
We've changed our party. We've won the trust and confidence of voters. And now we can go on to change our country. So change is possible.
Labour are making gains, but does it put them on course to win the next general election?
These results have far exceeded our expectations, and indeed those of the independent pundits. It's one of the best ever election results for the Liberal Democrats at council elections.
An impressive performance by the Liberal Democrats, who are sharing the spoils with Labour. Greens and Independents are also taking seats. And counting continues across the country with more than 150 councils still to declare. We'll bring you those results live. We'll have expert analysis from elections guru Professor Sir John Curtice.
And I'll be here at the magic touchscreen bringing you the latest data and analysis. Lots of councils still counting, lots of results still to come.
Welcome to this Politics Live local election special. It's going to be a very, very busy afternoon because we're going to have results being declared for councils right through the next 4.5 hours. And of course, they're important, these elections in England, broadly fought 4 years ago in 2019, because they will reflect the public mood and the feeling generally, taking the temperature of these parts of the country in terms of how they feel about the main political parties and whether and how much we can take in terms of looking ahead to the next general election. First of all, let's just bring you up to date with the latest tally in terms of the number of councillors. You can see here, compared to 2019, Labour on 746. They're up 141. The Conservatives are on 500 councillors. They're down 256. The Lib Dems up 64, bringing their total so far to 367. Independents on 236, up 22. The Greens up 36 on 68. And residents groups, local associations, are down 1. The state of the parties in terms of the number of councils. Labour have 25. They've added 3. We'll talk about those in just a moment. The Conservatives are on 13. They have lost 11. The Liberal Democrats have added 1 in Windsor and Maidenhead. They're on 9. The Independents are on 2, having added 1. A score draw of 0 for the moment for the Greens. They're hoping to get their first majority council this time round. And hung councils on 22. They have added 6. So let's open the programme today with our guest, starting with you, Andrea. That's the verdict so far. A bad night for the Conservatives. That's the verdict from the public. What's your verdict?
Well, it's incredibly disappointing. Obviously, it is as expected that we thought we would lose a number of seats. I would like to pay tribute to so many hard-working councillors who will be bitterly disappointed today. But at the same time, I don't think that we're seeing a huge breakthrough from Labour. I think people are saying we're unhappy with the Conservatives, but we're seeing a lot of equal gains amongst opposition parties, which doesn't suggest to me anything like Tony Blair experienced in the run-up to a general election in '97. So I don't think that it's a real endorsement of Labour. I think people do want us to focus, and as Rishi Sunak said, he is absolutely focused on dealing with what people care about, which is sorting out the economy, it is cutting waiting lists for the NHS, and also vitally stopping the small boats. So I think there's everything to play for.
What's your verdict, Liz, particularly following on from Andrea saying people may be fed up with the Conservatives, but they're not yet in love with Labour?
Labour is back, and we are back in every part of the country, in the north, in the East Midlands, the West Midlands, the South West, the South East. It has been a catastrophic night for the Tories. Don't forget, the last time we had this set of elections was their second worst ever.
Labour didn't perform very well either, did they, in 2019?
But look at where we've... No, we didn't. No. And that, Joe, is the point. That if you'd have told me back in 2019 that we could see such seismic movements in the key areas we need to win to form the next government. You know, that victory in Medway, what we've seen in Plymouth, and I know we'll come on and talk
Well, we're
about
going to just show our viewers, perhaps we can see the Labour gains. They are important. These were key targets for Labour. Medway in Kent, Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire and Plymouth in the South West, underlining your point about it being spread geographically.
That's absolutely right. And if you look at the scale of the victory in Plymouth and in Medway, it does take us back to that 1997 level of support.
Are you really as confident as that?
Can I just say, I do believe we're on course to form a majority in next government, but I take absolutely nothing for granted. We said we had, you know, a mountain to climb. That mountain was Everest. We've smashed through the base camp, but we've still got to get to the summit.
I will come back to you, Andrea, in just a second. How do you see it? What's your verdict so far? Because there are an awful lot of results still to come in. Is it really true that Liz Kendall can say, as Keir Starmer has said, that they're on course to win an outright majority at the next general election?
I think that's the difficult thing, that clearly Labour now look like at the next election they could take power. I think there is a question mark over whether that would be a majority government or not. But that line from Rishi Sunak in that clip just now about how there's no groundswell of support for Labour, I don't know if they've got the TVs off in CCHQ, and we've heard Andrea saying the same thing here. Just look at those numbers. Tories down 250, Labour up 150. I think still, obviously it's very early, but you've got a lot of key councils coming later today. Places like Swindon that you need to win.
They're ahead at the moment,
into Downing Street. Exactly. Places like Medway, you only win places like Medway if you've got a chance of getting back into government. And at the moment, they do seem to be doing quite well in those places.
What do you think, Inara, in terms of Rishi Sunak? This has been billed very much, this set of local elections in England, as his first electoral test. And he himself, the Prime Minister, said the other night, perhaps it was last night, I'm losing track as all the hours merge into together, where he said, you know, after the sort of box set drama of last year, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, it was always going to be a tough night. There are not going to be any changes, though, are there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the Conservatives are very surprised about the results. I mean, Andrea mentioned the key priorities of the Conservative government, whether that was the economy, but also stopping the boats. But on those fundamental issues, the track record for the Conservatives is pretty poor. So in terms of what people will be thinking about and supporting, I don't think that they went into those booths very confident in the Conservative Party. But I think whilst Labour has undoubtedly made some gains, I think that after 3 prime ministers in 1 year, after coronavirus, Partygate, all of the huge scandals that we've seen over the last 12 months, let alone few years, I think this is not the kind of results that we would be expecting for a government that is in waiting, quite frankly. And I think that Labour should be expecting far more success. And I think it is reflective that for the majority of people, they're still not seeing that transformative alternative that gives them real confidence in voting for a different party.
I would say, though, it's not just looking at... I mean, there really has been a seismic change in Medway and in Plymouth. If you take seats like Worcester, that we last won in 2001, if you look at what we've done in Telford and the Wrekin, we lost Wrekin in 2005. All of the gains that we are making, and also in areas like, in my part of the country, North West Leicestershire, we haven't taken the council over, but we've made big gains there, and in Bolsover and in Bassetlaw, winning back those red wall places, making progress in the southeast and the southwest too, seats that we haven't held since 2001. If you look at where the battle counts, we are winning, but we know we've got further to go.
Right. Well, you know you've got further to go. I mean, Andrea, I'm going to let you reflect, actually, on this tweet from a Conservative MP, Justin Tomlinson, in the Swindon area. After so long, he says, it was always going to be tough, but the party collectively needs to take this as a wake-up call to refresh and renew. We have to once again offer positive reasons to vote for us at every level. What do you think he means by refresh and renew?
Well, I think he's absolutely right. You know, people were wanting to give the Conservatives a kicking, but I just do want to come back to what Liz just said, because, you know, when I look through all of the conversations between Conservative MPs overnight, there are some fantastic stories of people gaining seats and holding on to seats that they weren't expected to win. So, on the one hand, yes, the big picture looks dreadful, but on the ground, there are still people who've hung on and who've done well. For example, in Peterborough, in Sandwell, where we've had some really good gains. So actually, it seems to me, from what talking to colleagues about, is that we are absolutely well. We just gain. No, it's not. I think that there have been some very good gains.
But you do accept that the big picture is not looking positive in any way at the moment.
I have said that the big picture is very disastrous for the Conservatives.
Because the point is,
I would like
should there be changes, Andrew, on the basis of what we heard? I will let you, but should there be changes? Just taking that sentiment from Justin Tomlinson.
If I may, the issue that we have is that we've had a very torrid time over the last 18 months. We've had the coronavirus pandemic, which has left people very disappointed, very frustrated. We've had Putin's aggression in Russia, from Russia to Ukraine. We've had a cost of living crisis, which we're still in the middle of. We've had some very damaging strikes. We've had enormous headwinds. And exactly as has been said, that does not reflect well on Labour, that they have not been able to do better than they have.
But does it reflect well on Rishi Sunak as a newish Prime Minister who was supposed to be able to steady the ship?
Rishi Sunak cannot be blamed for the cost of living crisis. I'm not saying nothing to do with Rishi at all. I'm saying the Conservatives have a long way to go, but I do believe over the last 6 months under Rishi Sunak, we are now getting back to being the competent government that is focused on the people's priorities of getting inflation
we'll come back
down.
to that. Well, inflation isn't coming down as yet, but we'll come back to that in just a moment, Andrew, because you are here for the next hour or so. I just want to dig down a little bit more into some of these results with David Wallace Lockhart, who is at the touchscreen for us. David.
Jo, let's start with a reminder of the current state of the change in seats. And remember, we're comparing here to the 2019 local elections, where the Conservatives did quite badly, Labour did not do particularly well, and the Lib Dems had quite a good night. Labour up by 141 seats, the Conservatives losing at this point over 250. They've lost around a third of all councillors that they've been defending. The Lib Dems increasing their number of seats by 64. What does that mean for councils changing hands? Well, Labour have gained 3, the Conservatives have lost 11, and the Lib Dems have gone up by 1. And we can have a look at some of those Conservative losses. We've mentioned some of them: Medway in Kent, Windsor in Berkshire. Also worth reflecting, areas like North West Leicestershire, like Hertsmere, traditionally very solid Conservative areas, and highlighting the problem the Conservatives are facing, that they are going to no overall control. The Conservatives have lost their majority there. But let's go to the Kent coast and talk about Medway. That's where Sir Keir Starmer has been this morning, celebrating Labour's performance so far. And we can see why, because this has been Conservative since 2003. Labour haven't been in power in this council since 1998. But with 33 seats, that's gone from Conservative to being now a Labour council. And it's worth having a quick look at this number here, the EU referendum vote. 64% leave in Medway in Kent. Now, we know the Labour Party has had problems in recent years in Brexit backing areas, so they'll be very happy with that progress. And let's look at how the seats changed hands. The Conservatives down by 13, Labour up by 11. But Labour aren't the only party happy at the moment. The Lib Dems celebrating one win in particular. If we go to Windsor and Maidenhead in Berkshire, that's where Sir Ed Davey went to celebrate and proclaim that it's time up for Rishi Sunak. And This has been Conservative since 2007. When it comes to the House of Commons, Theresa May is one of the local MPs. The Lib Dems on 22 seats there, needing 21 for a majority, so they have taken it from the Conservatives. It's now a Lib Dem seat. Conservatives losing 16 of their seats, the Lib Dems gaining 13. Now, lots of seats still counting, and a few that we can look out for ahead in the programme. Stratford-on-Avon and Warwickshire, the Lib Dems looking at that seat, hoping to make a dent. Dover and Kent Labour also have their eye on that. And of course, we've mentioned it already, Swindon, that was Conservative. Early wards already being announced, and suggestions are there's quite a swing to Labour and it could potentially go to Labour. So we'll be keeping a very close eye on that one. If I haven't gone through your local area, what you can do is go to the BBC News website. You can stick in your postcode and you'll find out the latest with local elections, what's going on where you are. Or, of course, stick with us because we'll be bringing you all the results.
Absolutely stick with us. David Wallace Lockhart, thank you very much, and we will come back to you shortly. Let's talk to our elections expert, our elections guru, Professor Sir John Curtice. Sir John, I don't know if you could hear what Andrea Leadsom and Liz Kendall were saying, but I will broadly paraphrase because there are more Conservative losses that have come in over the last sort of few moments or so, and certainly prospective ones. Andrea Leadsom saying it's been a very disappointing night, but that she couldn't see any huge enthusiasm for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Liz Kendall saying, and echoing Keir Starmer by saying we're on course to win the next general election. What say you?
Well, those two statements are not necessarily in conflict with each other. If the Conservatives are doing very badly, even if Labour aren't advancing very much, that might still be sufficient to enable Labour to win a general election. And actually, I would suggest that it may indeed be the case that both statements are true. Certainly, one criterion that we can use to argue that perhaps what's happened on Thursday is at least as much to do with discontent with the Conservatives as it is with enthusiasm for Labour is that while the Conservative vote is in the places where we've been collecting the detailed ward-by-ward results, support for the Conservatives is 4 or 5 points down, and where it was last year, Labour basically are in the same position. I can also point out, actually, that if we go back and compare Labour's share of the vote now with what it was under Ed Miliband in 2012 in the ward places where we've been covering the detailed elections, actually Labour's share of the vote is still somewhat lower. But that said, we're certainly looking at a situation where the gap between Labour and the Conservatives is probably significantly wider than it has been in any previous set of local elections, and that around 4% or so, the swing from May 2019 in these elections is not that far short of the 5% swing that we would expect from the opinion polls, and therefore might just be enough to take Labour past the House of Commons. So maybe I would say that perhaps unusually for two opposition politicians, maybe they've both got a germ of truth in what they say, but perhaps they also need to listen to what their opponent is saying as well if they really want to get a rounded picture of where we might be at.
We should mention the Liberal Democrats because they are cock-a-hoop at taking Windsor and Maidenhead, and of course we all remember the Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey driving a tractor through what he calls the blue wall of those safe Tory seats. He is obviously celebrating so far and they're hoping for more gains, and the Greens too are adding to their tally.
Yes, I mean, in both cases, the truth is they're making modest progress, but it's modest progress on what was relatively good results back in 2019, in the case of the Liberal Democrats last year as well. The Liberal Democrats is key. Up one, you might say, well, so what? Well, it is that if that pattern were to continue, then we will probably conclude that the Liberal Democrats have recorded their best performance in local government elections in England since 2010, though still nothing like back to the level that they were before that, and that at least these local elections might mark further progress in the very substantial challenge the party faced 5, 6, 7 years ago of recovering the quite considerable local government base it once enjoyed, but was seriously damaged by the experience of the coalition. The Greens defending record performance in 2019. And again, it's up a bit. It's particularly up, by the way, in places where they were stronger already. And I think, we can see in terms of seat gains, the Greens also strengthening their toehold in English local government. And I think what we do have to remember about all of this is that while the politics of Westminster, at least in England and Wales, might be dominated by Conservative and Labour, the politics of local government in England is not dominated by those two parties to anything like the same degree. The Liberal Democrats, of course, have long done better in English local government elections. The Greens are now beginning to join them. And that does make it rather more difficult for both Conservative and Labour to be able to say, well, we're doing as well in these local elections as we're doing in the opinion polls, because frankly, that's now quite a tall order for both of them.
Professor Sir John Curtice, thank you very much. We will come back to you later on in the programme. Let me just bring you this important result. In Maidstone, in Kent, the Conservatives have lost. They are here. There are still some seats to declare, but they can't hold on to it. They're on 22 seats. Independents are on 10, Liberal Democrats 10, and 5 to Labour and 3 to the Greens. It's gone into no overall control. You can see there that the Conservatives lost 5. They were down by 5, and Independents, Labour and Greens have added to their tally. You can see the vote share there, but let's have a look at how that has actually changed since 2019. There you go. There's the drop. 9% drop by the Conservatives in a part of the country that's certainly considered to be one of their strongholds in Kent, and Labour have gained the most there. They have gone up by 6%. They have taken Medway, of course, in the same part of the world. Let's get... Andrea, do you want to say anything about Maidstone?
I mean, it's a huge disappointment, as I said earlier, for hard-working councillors to lose their seats.
Who's to blame? What's to blame?
Well, there are... Exactly as Professor Sir John Curtice just said, local elections are very much more an open race, and we saw there that there have been some independent gains.
But Labour have been the biggest.
They are very much about local issues such as potholes, planning, house building, all of the sort of areas that obviously MPs are very concerned about, but local elections are very much more on those local issues. So I think it's very hard to say for sure. Clearly, the Conservatives are still the biggest party, but very disappointing to have lost overall control.
I mean, interestingly, the outgoing council leader Tory in Medway said it was about cost of living. It was about housing targets. It was about not being able to get a GP's appointment. I would say those are local, obviously, issues. They're also big national issues. Just before I get more reaction from our guests here, let's talk to the BBC's deputy political editor, Vicky Young, to give us your thoughts, Vicky, so far.
Well, there's no doubt about it. Conservatives talking about it being a disappointing night. I've just spoken to one cabinet minister who says this is definitely the upper end of disappointing. Because if you remember, we talked a lot, didn't we, about management expectation. Greg Hands, the chairman of the party, talking about losing 1,000 seats. And I remember at the time a couple of ministers and cabinet ministers saying, well, if he's saying 1,000 publicly, that means about 700. That's not too bad. I think it's going to be nearer, isn't it, that 1,000 mark? And that is a devastating result for the Conservatives based on terrible results last time round. Now, the question is, what are they going to do about that? One particular minister saying to me, look, this is not about the Prime Minister, it's about the party. Those close to Rishi Sunak want to distance him from all of this and say, look, this isn't surprising after everything that's happened over the last year, that he's, if you like, inherited that negativity from the Liz Truss regime, from the problems under Boris Johnson. And even though in Westminster there's a sense things have calmed down, Rishi Sunak's getting on with the job, clearly it hasn't been easily forgotten or forgiven elsewhere in the country. So for the Conservatives, a terrible night, terrible set of results. And the problem is that people are using either the Green Party, they're voting Labour, they're voting Lib Dem, and that is the anti-Tory sentiment, if you like. The Liberal Democrats very, very optimistic about what's still to come for them, and even predicting a big upset in Surrey Heath, which is Michael Gove's constituency area, you know, rock solid Conservative area. The Lib Dems now saying they're making big gains there, and it's really up in the air about who's going to control that council, which would be a pretty outstanding result if it were to happen.
Vicky Young, thank you very much. We're going to go to Swindon in just a moment. The issues that have been raised, cost of living, housing, GPs' appointments, these are things that the national government, the Rishi Sunak, said he will tackle, certainly when it comes to inflation and the economy.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is easy to say that these are focused on local issues, but national issues, of course, have a huge importance in the local elections. Interestingly, I grew up in Maidstone and actually went to school in Medway, and these are strong Conservative areas, but they actually have a lot of poverty in those areas as well. And so the losses that the Conservatives are having to Labour, I think, is a big demonstration that the cost of living is a massive issue for these people. The NHS, and actually over the last few years, all of those things have got substantially worse for ordinary people.
Yeah, I mean, I think having been door knocking in areas that we need to win back from the Conservatives, what you're seeing is that Conservative rhetoric has been trumped by Conservative reality.
Absolutely.
And in some of the more so-called blue wall seats, you have a lot of lifelong Tory voters furious with what happened with Boris Johnson, his lying, with trust.
But there is a new Prime Minister.
I know,
things
but
have changed, haven't they?
They feel that was not Conservative, how the economy was crashed. And in areas...
But does that indicate it might be temporary?
Let me just finish with this. And with areas where Boris Johnson won from the so-called red wall seats, they were told things would get better, and nothing seems to work. People can't pay their bills, they can't get a passport, let alone a GP's appointment, and they're worried about crime. And I think this is the problem for Rishi Sunak, is whatever they say, including on those green benches, the reality is people want change, and that's what they're voting for.
All right, well, let's go to Swindon and talk to the BBC reporter there, Dan O'Brien, because I think we are expecting that result in soon. And this is where Labour launched their local election campaign. So this will be a key target. We've heard from one of the region's MPs, the Conservative MP, very disappointed, Dan, Justin Tomlinson, saying it's time to refresh and renew.
Absolutely. I spoke to him. He's here today feeling very glum, as well as several of his colleagues here. This is a town the Conservatives have run for 20 years now, and although we're only partway through the results, we expect them to start coming thick and fast in the next hour. The mood here from the Conservatives is they've already lost, to be quite honest with you. To quote one of them, they feel they've been decimated when they, take the feeling of where things are at here. They put the blame for that firmly at the door of national politics. We've got a few local issues to talk about as well, but national politics is where they are putting the blame for their mood here today. Labour, as you say, have thrown the kitchen sink at taking Swindon back. It wasn't just launching the campaign here. We've had pretty much every big-name Labour politician come to visit Swindon in the last few weeks. They've put so much stock in taking this town back. They've given the local party an awful lot of physical support, but actually financial support as well, because they see it as a key town to win back if they're going to get back into government. That is not reflected on the Conservative side, I have to say. The Conservatives rather frustrated, is the mood I'm picking up here, that they haven't had the support they felt Labour have from their national colleagues.
Dan O'Brien there in Swindon, and we'll bring you that result, obviously, as soon as we have it. I think there are about 10 or so seats still to declare within that council of Swindon. Let's test the temperature in North Warwickshire with our BBC correspondent, Shelley Phelps. What's happening there, Shelley?
Hi Joe, well counting is underway. We're still waiting for a lot of those seats that are key seats and may decide which way the council goes. This is a key Labour target. It's been held by the Conservatives since 2015. Speaking to Labour Party sources, when I first arrived they told me that they were feeling very confident of a narrow win here, but when I checked in with them a little earlier, we've been hearing a lot about recounts and that there's quite a few seats with sort of 10 or 20 votes in it, and they were saying they thought now that maybe things could go to more likely to no overall control. For the Conservatives, there are, a lot of their activists and campaigners are looking quite nervous. Obviously, they know they're having, less good a night tonight. Sounds like they're just about to make another declaration now. But all eyes are on this council as well, because the two MPs here, Conservative held, they've both got quite large majorities. But the Midlands, is bellwether territory, so people are watching these results closely to see what clues might lie ahead for the next general election.
All right, Shelley, well done. Battling against the loudspeaker there behind you, but we could hear you. Shelley Phelps there in North Warwickshire. Let's pick up something, Andrea, with you, that our reporter Dan O'Brien was saying, that local Conservatives in Swindon feel decimated, and that it was national politics that had resulted in losses there.
I'll say again, it is a disappointing night for the Conservatives, and there's no doubt that it is national politics. It's the difficulties over the last year and a half. But over the last 6 months, in Rishi Sunak, we've had a Prime Minister who has really focused on the priorities of halving inflation, cutting debt, growing the economy, cutting A&E and NHS waiting lists and stopping the small boats.
But the delivery's not there yet, is it? He may have focused on them, but would you admit that the delivery isn't there? You are a Conservative who believes in low taxation.
No, don't put words into my mouth.
No, but you do.
The issue about inflation is that inflation was created by external shocks, OK? Energy prices, the cost of food as a result of the breakdown of SME supply chains and food supply chains post-COVID pandemic. So that huge inflation was a global problem.
I'm not disputing. Hang on.
And I agree.
I'm not disputing the reasons.
What Joe is saying is that there's no delivery, and I'm taking.
Well, there isn't yet.
No, because there isn't around the world. This is not a UK-specific thing. We've seen even in New Zealand, where we had an incredibly popular Prime Minister, her ratings sank like a stone as a result of the cost of living crisis. All I'm saying is, let's be fair and even-handed about this.
We're just looking at the verdict of the voters, though, Andrea.
And that is totally disappointing, as I say. And what I'm trying to do is to explain why there isn't delivery yet. To your point, there isn't the delivery. The reason is because there is a global inflation issue.
All right,
and
you've said that. But Andrea
is determined
hang on.
to get to grips
But you may feel that voters think after 13 years of Conservative, for the reasons you've said, that there isn't yet delivery on those key priorities. For whatever reason,
there wasn't a cost of living crisis in 2010. We ran out of money. Labour left us with no money. There was no money left.
You're sounding...
A Conservative government had to come in to actually fix our economy after massive debts were incurred by poor Labour management. And over that 10-year period, so much of the story has been about trying to fix the economy. If we'd had the pandemic hit without having fixed the economy, there is no way we'd have been able to afford the furlough scheme. So actually, history has consequences. And actually, last night is a devastating result for Conservatives, but there are things. The Prime Minister's focus is in a good way on tackling the real problems.
Andrea sounds worried, and she should be worried. And the problem for the Conservatives is, we can have a whole debate about the fact that inflation is much worse in other countries, even though they also had a pandemic and faced the problems with Russia and Ukraine. But the issue is that after 13 years, people are asking themselves if they feel better off, and they don't. They can't pay their bills, let alone go on holiday. They can't see a GP. You have got people who are so worried about being able to get an ambulance, they're sorting out with friends and neighbours to be able to do that. And that is the reality. What the challenge is now...
Yeah, because what will you do about a cost of living crisis that will probably, sadly, still be in place at the time of the next election, or people will still be feeling it? And I haven't yet heard from Labour politicians how you're going to change the weather on that.
Well, we've said how we would take immediate action to help people with the cost of their bills through having a much more effective windfall tax on the energy companies. We have said that we'll long-term help people.
I mean, there is support in place now.
If you'll let me finish,
What level?
Hang on, Andrea. Let Liz finish. Go on.
Long-term, we will help keep those costs low by properly insulating people's homes, and we actually have a plan to grow the economy long-term. We have a clear plan to get more staff into the NHS, to bring those waits down, and for more police and PCSOs on the beat to tackle crime. But you are right to say, and our biggest challenge is that people want change, and we have to absolutely convince people change is possible.
Because you're but you're not promising, are you, to, for instance, cut taxes? You complain about the highest tax burden, as many people have, and perhaps many of these voters in these local elections. But you're not planning to cut taxes. If it is a global shock in terms of inflation, it will still be quite difficult to keep it down under a Labour government.
May I say, the fundamental challenge the country has is that the economy has had, at best, anemic growth for 13 years. And people's wages are not rising. So if you don't have a proper plan for growth, people will feel these impacts and we won't have the money for our public services. And I'm under no illusions about how far we've come since 2019. I just cannot tell you how awful that election was.
You're talking about the general election,
I am, but what Keir Starmer has done is he has got us back onto the pitch. And now the next point is to win the general election.
Well, that's a good point.
And that's where we're focusing on
These results certainly show that the election is back in play, the general election. The polls were showing it already, the national polls, putting Labour, 14, 15, 16 points ahead. And now they are back in play. But at these local elections, it's difficult to extrapolate how people would respond in a general election. And people can vote differently, and we are still possibly 18 months away from a general election. So do you think that for Rishi Sunak the sort of hope is fading, or has Keir Starmer still yet to seal the deal?
Well, you know that things can quickly change. They did after the local council elections in 2017, where I can remember being out with Theresa May the day after the elections, and she was really trying to not beam with kind of smiling because she knew the general election was coming up and she wanted to manage expectations. And then we know it just went totally wrong. So things can change around quite quickly, but there is this problem for the Tories that there is now a general feeling in the country that things are broken and the Tories' time is up. And how do you shift that? They tried chucking Boris Johnson over the side of the boat. That didn't work. They tried getting rid of Liz Truss. That didn't work. And, to go back to Andrew's point on delivery and the economy and how other countries are struggling, look at the economic growth figures for the rest of the G7. Look at the figures for other countries around the world.
4% in the UK,
and you look at the figures,
in Germany.
The Tories and Rishi Sunak said they were going to grow our economy, and it's 0% growth. Inflation's still high. Look at all the other promises.
Well,
stopping
no
the boats, people are still coming.
Strikes
still going on.
Except, Anaya, Rishi Sunak's personal poll ratings are quite good. Relatively speaking, it's the party that it's the Conservative Party that is not doing well. Yeah. Its brand in the polls, this is, obviously with all the caveats that polls have. It's the opposite, actually, for Labour Party. The Labour Party is doing quite well. Keir Starmer is still trying to improve his personal appeal. So is Andrea right, Rishi Sunak needs more time, or is it really just a case of managing decline?
Even if he does need more time, that rhetoric is just not going to cut it. I mean, for a lot of people, their views is that they take the Conservative Party since the 2010, and it would be wrong for Rishi Sunak to completely disassociate himself from that legacy. And I think that if we're going to talk about the deep issues within the economy, I think that the public can see through this idea that it's simply just to do with the invasion of Ukraine or COVID. There's long-term problems in the way that our economy is organised, and that is partly what caused the great majority that the Tories won in 2019, that actually people were concerned about the fact that the gains over the last 20 years were not being equally spread across the country. I mean, even just the question of house building, that's not to do with the kind of global energy crisis. The fact that a generation is locked out of housing is a really big issue for the Conservative Party.
It's a really good point. And actually, I do think that the commitment to levelling up has been really important for the Conservative government to actually investing in key parts of the country where the talent is all equal but the opportunity isn't there.
And
on house building, I mean, I absolutely agree. It's a huge challenge, and all of these things they're almost not left and right issues. They're who's got the best ideas.
But do you think they have materialised, Andrew? Let's look at levelling up. We'll just take one example, Stoke-on-Trent, for example. I mean, that was a good.
Let's
start with mine first. Indulge me, and then we'll go to Walsall.
Let's go for one that we've
because Stoke-on-Trent is a pretty symbolic
Yes,
part of the world with three Conservative
unbiased.
MPs, but the council has gone.
Yes.
And
in Walsall
that was in an area. No,
but exactly
Andrea, let me finish the point, because levelling up was supposed to transform that part of the world, and the verdict from Stoke-on-Trent is it hasn't materialised. Would you accept that is the problem with, yes, rhetoric, but if the delivery doesn't come, maybe it's taking too long for a lot of voters from the promises that were made from Boris Johnson right through to Rishi Sunak on housing. Rishi Sunak's dropped those mandatory housing targets. Maybe you thought that was a good idea.
So I think that there is a really profound issue here, and if we can just talk about the specifics rather than the politics of it, because where house building is concerned, people don't want insensitive development in their area. Now, some people call it NIMBYism, other people call it listening carefully to what your local community wants. And the problem with top-down housing targets is that they do end up putting housing where communities don't want them.
Well,
and all political parties have wrestled with this. In my opinion, I think there should be housing targets, but they should absolutely focus on those areas that.
Well, let me just put that to Liz, because actually, interestingly, Keir Starmer. No, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to you about young people in just a moment, because Labour has said, Keir Starmer saying he's going to reimpose those mandatory housing targets, and actually we heard from Medway that those were the very targets that people had reacted against before the Tories dropped them.
We need clear targets to increase the number of housing. We need to make sure councils can actually work together in groups to get that housing there. One of the things I think is, we certainly see this in my own city, extremely frustrating, is that if we were able to work more closely with the county, we could get those developments. And thirdly, we've said, and this is the big thing I get, even in my own constituency, is if the housing is going to be there, what about the pressure on GP services? I can't even see the GP, or on local schools. So we've got a plan to increase the number of housing, to make sure that young people are able to get a first shot, and that by getting councils work together and the housing developers to make sure those extra services...
Well, how do you do that? How do you make the housing developers do it?
Because there is a proportion, you can have that where a proportion has to be contributed towards making sure those other public services are there. It's not beyond the wit of man to make this happen, but I do believe in those targets, because that is what will work to get the housing that we need.
Let's catch up with the Liberal Democrats, because we can talk to the party's deputy leader, Daisy Cooper. Well, congratulations to you, Daisy Cooper, on Windsor and Maidenhead. We obviously saw Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, there. Do you think you're going to win Stratford-on-Avon?
Well, it does look at the moment as though it's neck and neck, and I think we could be up for an upset, particularly in that part of the world, possibly also in Surrey Heath and parts of Hertfordshire as well.
So decorum, then, included in that. You think your prospects are looking good too?
From what I'm hearing, it could be neck and neck. Certainly it felt like that on polling day yesterday. And I think also potentially in Surrey Heath. So I think in Michael Gove's backyard, in Nadeem Zahawi's backyard, and across parts of Hertfordshire as well, we're definitely in for some upsets, I think.
Is it, though, more a case of people being fed up with the Conservatives, as these results so far seem to have indicated overnight and this morning, rather than a rush of enthusiasm for the Liberal Democrats?
I think it's a bit of both. There's absolutely no doubt that people are really sick to the back teeth of this Conservative government. People raise with me on the doorstep the issue about the NHS being perpetually in crisis, about the enormous cost of living crisis and the cost of energy bills and food, as well as the fact they see the Conservatives allowing water companies to pump sewage into our waterways with impunity. But at the same time, on top of all of those issues as well, they see that local Liberal Democrats have a plan in their local areas. We work incredibly hard, we listen to people, we don't take votes for granted, and we set out very clearly what we're going to do. And so when we run councils and services very well, I think people vote for us, but also against the government, to send them a very clear message.
Right, and in local politics, and when it comes to local elections, as you know, Liberal Democrats tend to outperform their national polls. So would you agree that this could turn out to be a strong performance for the Liberal Democrats overall? You had quite a strong performance in 2019, so we've yet to see the full picture. But at a national level, that won't necessarily translate into the same strong performance.
Well, we will never take any votes for granted. And of course, every election is very different. But, I'm speaking to you from St Albans, where we won the local council in 2019. And just a few months later, I was elected as the constituency MP. And I hope very much that when we see the results from today, from this set of local elections, it'll be clear that there are many more parts of the country where we can oust Conservative MPs at the next general election.
Daisy Cooper, thank you very much. John, there is this blue wall, red wall, using these terms, blue wall, traditional Conservative areas, the sorts of areas that Daisy Cooper is talking about for the Liberal Democrats, and, of course, Labour have been trying to regain some of their former strongholds and territory with some success. It's going to be difficult for those Conservatives in the areas the Liberal Democrats are targeting. They will be feeling nervous, won't they, MPs there, where and if those councils go to the Lib Dems?
Yeah, and it doesn't take too much to spook Tory MPs or any MPs, actually. And, what's been the case over the last few months when Rishi Sunak has been in is that we haven't had much blue-on-blue infighting. People do seem to have calmed down. Even big Liz Truss supporters who were really annoyed that she got kicked out of Downing Street haven't really had much to say about Rishi Sunak. But I think after these results, you will have people starting to panic about their seats and thinking, hang on a minute.
See Johnny Mercer's face.
Exactly.
And that's
Am I going to be out of a job? And I think that's when you start to see more and more debates about which way do you go forward. And we were talking about housing just now. You turned on the radio and the TV this morning. One of Andrew's colleagues was saying, we're being punished by voters because we're not building enough housing. And another one was on a different channel saying we're being punished by voters because we've got targets to build housing.
Let's just put the housing issue to one side generally. It is important. These local elections, they affect morale.
Yes.
They affect momentum and the mood within political parties. I hope I'm not being rude by saying you are obviously being defensive about these election results because they don't look good for the Conservatives. Are you worried, panicking, nervous?
Do you know what? Honestly, I see from the chats with Conservative colleagues overnight and during the course of the morning is an absolute commitment to sticking with what we're doing, which is Rishi Sunak's commitment to those 5 key points about halving inflation, cutting debt, growing the economy, improving NHS waiting times and stopping the small boats. And that really galvanises Conservative colleagues with a real target that we want to focus on. So you're right, people are incredibly disappointed. Some are, clutching at the good news. We held this seat or we gained some seats, or indeed that the Labour gains have been at the expense of the independents, not at the expense of the Conservatives.
But do you think people should change? Do you think Rishi Sunak should change tack? Do you think there should be a refresh and renew, perhaps in the Cabinet, of something that will reflect these, I think you use devastating losses?
I'm absolutely sure that the Prime Minister will be looking to see how he can really renew the efforts of the Conservatives.
How do you think?
Well, it is difficult, isn't it? Because we've been in government for 13 years. We've had some enormous headwinds. We've just had the most appalling period of politics in our party. That makes things very difficult. However, now we have a Prime Minister who is seriously smart, who is, as you said yourself, Jo, doing incredibly well in the polls as an individual leader. And what we have to do is to build on that. And I do think Conservative colleagues are keeping the faith. They absolutely
you think they are?
Yes,
before I come to you, Liz, because I want to talk to Adam Stokes. He is the former Deputy Leader of South Kesteven District Council. It's gone from Conservative to no overall control. Welcome to you, Adam. Both you, I think, and the Leader, you both lost seats as you lost control of the council. What's your explanation? What do you think the reason is?
Well, mainly what we found was it was all to do with government issues. I mean, locally we were getting very positive feedback, but what people had concerns with cost of living, the fuel, the prices, the mortgage, immigration, and they feel like the government isn't actually on their side. And I'm saying that as a Conservative.
Right. And go on, sorry.
And I do think that we are missing a massive trick. We should be returning back to our basic strategy, which is low tax, pro growth. And at the moment, when we've got Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor putting up corporation tax to 26%, how is that encouraging low tax?
Well, Andrea Leadsom, former Cabinet Minister, is here in the studio with us. Adam, what do you say to that, returning to those core issues, which I put to you earlier about
I absolutely agree. I'm a low-tax Conservative, pro-growth, and actually, if we had the time to go into it, I could give you a whole narrative about why we've ended up with higher taxes. But there is absolutely no doubt that any Conservative government will want to reduce taxes. I would certainly prefer to be reducing them now, but the reality is that, Liz mentioned that Labour would have a realistic windfall tax. Well, already energy firms are paying enormous windfall taxes. There is a limit to the amount that you can raise the money, sort of soak the rich kind of Labour narrative. And actually what Conservatives want to see is lower taxes, but to encourage growth. And until such time as we have resolved some of our fiscal problems, we actually have the credibility of our economy.
Well, as you can see, Adam thinks it's too late. You need to do it right now. You need to cut taxes, including corporations. Is that what you would do?
I think the issue here, we've been clear where we want to see taxes raised. We want to scrap the non-dom tax status to put it into the NHS to get the staff that we need. We've said we'll get rid of those private school breaks and put that into
to some extent tinkering around the edges. We are talking significant billions, but it's not going to transform the health service. It's not going to transform public services.
Schools will collapse.
If it's possible to get a word in.
Well, keep trying.
If you think that 10,000 more nurses and doubling the number of medical school places won't make a difference to the NHS, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. And the problem for the Conservatives is this. You've got one part of their party, screaming for lower taxes. You've got Jeremy Hunt in the Treasury saying no because that would mean cuts to public services. They don't know what they're for. And Labour is clear that we will make choices on taxes and we will put that money into our public services. That's the problem for the
Before I come to you, Inaya, just going to go back to Adam. Listening to Andrea Leadsom there, does that reassure you in any way that the Tories are going to return to the sort of strategy you'd like to see?
If I'm brutally honest, no. I've got huge concern that we do focus on Westminster politics and some MPs need to get back out on the doorstep far more than they do presently to understand the real concerns of residents. I mean, this has been a very brutal election for quite a lot of my colleagues. And it's time that the Conservative Party as a whole reassess where we're going. And we have been a long time.
What does that mean, reassessing it? I mean, are you talking about a change of leader or are you happy with Rishi Sunak?
I think what we need to do is reassess the Conservative principles and make sure that we are following our core party beliefs.
And if that doesn't happen, if there isn't a change in strategy, in other words, at the next autumn statement it would be taxes are being cut or the corporation hike is cancelled sometime down the line, what do you think is going to be the end result for the Conservative Party?
Well, I think we are getting very similar to the 1997 scenario where we'll be out of government. It's quite a simple equation. I think we need to take the message that the voters gave us last night very seriously and understand that they are very angry with the party at present.
Adam Stokes there in South Kesteven. Thank you very much. Inaya.
I think it is true that the burden of tax on businesses, there is an argument that it is hampering innovation and hampering actually entrepreneurship in this country. But I do think when we have this conversation about low or higher taxes, I think it is missing the point. I think most people, broadly accept that if we have a bit of higher taxes, it'd be fine if it actually genuinely goes to things that are improving society. And there is a lack of political imagination of what the realignment of 2019 meant. People want infrastructure projects that connect up the country, radical house building, as we've already talked about, building potentially nuclear power stations that actually reduce people's energy bills, things that actually make a material difference to the long-term future of this country.
And surely, though, Inaya, you would agree that that is exactly what the Conservatives are doing, the commitment to building nuclear power stations, to rail infrastructure,
there was a moratorium on nuclear and a ban on other forms of energy.
That was under Labour. It was Labour who rejected
it was continued up until very recently.
You've done the ban on...
Can I ask you on the realignment, Andrea, because actually Inaya raises an important point. That realignment, as many political commentators saw it, and Boris Johnson was then able to win that very big majority at the end of 2019. Do you think that has now and is crumbling? Brexit and the consequences of that leave vote, you're a Brexiteer, is now beginning to sort of fade into the past. And that, to some extent, was a unifying, for parts of the country, a unifying campaign for the Conservatives. It's either going or it's gone.
So, in my opinion, we eventually left the European Union in 2020, almost minutes before COVID pandemic locked us down. So, if you like, there's been a lag in terms of being able to benefit from what was known as the Brexit dividend. So now we're starting to see, you know, the UK joining the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. That will in itself realign international global trade, and it puts the UK at the forefront of being able to influence the way that
but politically, is that support beginning to go? I mean, I'm just going to give you a result that the BBC is calling. I don't have the specific figures, and that's East Staffordshire. Conservative, with a majority of 7. It's been Conservative since 2003, and it looks as if they've lost it, or they have lost it, even though we haven't got the figures. That would be another example of an area, again, that might have been in favour of leaving the EU, and again, all these years later, taking into account the pandemic happened in 2020, but politically it is not a galvanising force.
Yeah, so, I mean, I completely take what Adam said earlier as the need for the Conservatives to reevaluate, to refresh, to look very carefully at, are we absolutely doing what the people want us to do? And I think in terms of Rishi's 5 priorities, we are absolutely in the right place. And the big question for us now is, how do we get there? Is it by, as Inaya says, cutting taxes for certain sectors, and does that galvanise the growth? The problem that we've actually had since 2010 has been low productivity, which has become in-baked. And the reason for that, of course, was because of the financial crisis, meaning that interest rates were brought
13 years on. This is 13 years on. But all right, I mean, you are giving a little bit of history. I'm trying to though, bring it up to date, because 2019 was a whole different landscape, as we know. Theresa May, and I'm talking about at the time of the local elections, when these elections were broadly fought. Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May, Vince Cable.
So if I think about what's happened over the last sort of 7 years, people do...
We haven't got that long for you to tell us what's happened over the last...
If I think about the big seismic changes we've seen, people do want change. And people need an immediate difference to help them with their bills. But we need to tackle the root causes of the problem. So whether that's on the economy with a shift towards clean energy, whether in the NHS, that's towards shifting the focus to prevention to help people stay living healthy at home. They need immediate help, but we need to tackle those longer-term challenges. And I think the problem for the Conservatives is, after 13 years, they don't have a plan. Our challenge is Labour, and we've made huge... Well,
they've got their 5 pledges, or the Prime Minister's got his 5 pledges.
But we have to do more to convince people, just as we've changed our party, we can change the country.
Well, that's certainly what Sir Keir Starmer has said he has done, is changing the party since Jeremy Corbyn. Well, in Hatfield, in Hertfordshire, Grant Shapps, the Energy and Security Secretary of State, that's his backyard. The Conservatives have lost that to no overall control. Solihull, the Conservatives have held Solihull, you'll be pleased to know, Andrea Leadsom. That at the moment is a pretty rare hold for now in a metropolitan area. But we're going to talk actually to Zach Polansky, Deputy Leader of the Green Party. They've certainly improved their tally of seats, but of course they are still waiting for that opportunity to be a majority party on a council, because they haven't been up until now. Now, mid-Suffolk, you've got 3 Green gains there. Hello to you, by the way, Zach, from the Tories. You've made massive gains in East Hertfordshire. Why do you think that is?
Well, this is a phenomenal set of results for the Green Party.
Well,
it's in fact
is it phenomenal?
Surpassing even our own expectations. Pundits just a few weeks ago were saying this would be a very difficult election for the Green Party, because in 2019 we had our best results and we trebled the number of councillors since then. So the fact we're both holding our number of councillors and adding more councillors is amazing. But let's look at East Hertfordshire.
Yes.
There we had 2 Green councillors. Overnight, we've now had 15 gains, taking us to 17.
Okay.
We'll shortly be hearing from the rest of the results, and we could be the largest party on that council.
And what is it that's won those for you?
Well, I think it's a lot of things, but mainly I think what we're seeing is the result of people absolutely fed up with 13 years of Tory austerity, and then looking to Labour, who are offering no inspiration and no practical solutions. When we've been on the ground, we've been talking about insulating homes, saving local services, stopping bus cuts. All of these things have been resonating with people, because the thing I hear more and more is when people see a Green candidate become a councillor and get elected, they want more Green councillors. And I'm really hoping in the future we continue to see this build.
Right. I mean, you've obviously added a significant number of councillors there in East Hertfordshire. As I say, you haven't actually ever had a majority on a council. In Brighton and Hove, you've been running it, but I think as a minority administration. Why not? I mean, maybe people just don't like you running the council as a majority party, despite the fact that you've added quite a number of councillors in places like East Hertfordshire.
Well, I think that's contrary to all of the evidence as these results come in. I think it's things like we want to have a wealth tax. That's a 1% tax on the wealthiest 1%. That would raise about £75 billion a year. You'd think that's something Labour would be all over, but they're just not brave enough to say that. So I think people are increasingly seeing the Green Party as a brave party that's willing to speak out for the mood of the country, to stand up against this Conservative government, and also to have much better policies than the Labour Party and implement them. If you look somewhere like Bristol, which is one of our target seats for the next election.
Yeah, although not, of course, in these local elections.
Absolutely, but it's an example of where there's 20 seats for councillors. 17 of those are already Green. So you can see if people vote in the same ways locally as they do nationally, and I realise that's a challenge, and we're ready to face that, then Carla Denyer will be the next MP for Bristol West, and that's exciting for the Green Party to continue our representation.
Although, actually, what do you say to Daisy Cooper, the Liberal Democrats deputy leader, who says it's all very well at a local level, the Greens are putting in a relatively strong performance, but at a national level, you've had one MP for years, Caroline Lucas, and she took that seat really off Labour. If you want to kick the Tories out, you vote Liberal Democrat, you don't vote Green at a national level.
Well, again, I think it's absurd. There's lots of places where we're extending administrations. Places like Lancaster, Lewis, all of those places where we've had Green councillors, we're getting more Green councillors. But I think the wider point is this, that we know the difference Caroline Lucas has made in Parliament, and we see the difference that it makes to have an elected Green in the room, someone speaking powerfully and compassionately, holding truth to power. And I think Green politicians aren't necessarily professional politicians. They're cleaners, doctors, teachers, nurses. They're people who are embedded in their communities. And I think people want more of that kind of politics. And it's brilliant to see these results coming in because it's really validating that.
All right, Zach Polansky, sounding and looking very upbeat there for the Greens. Thank you for joining us. Let me just bring you this result. Mayor of Mansfield. These are town mayors. First time for first past the post system, just as in Westminster. Before it was a supplementary vote system. Just a little bit of information. Anyway, Andy Abrahams, it's a Labour hold. Congratulations, but perhaps wasn't completely unexpected that he would hold it. But anyway,
no,
nearly 10,000.
It was only won by 2 votes.
All right, so is it? Oh, well, actually, we can see the share. I mean, we'll have to have a look at the change.
It's really good.
45% share there for Labour. Let's have a look at the change then since 2019. And Liz is right. It's gone up by 16% since 2019. And you can see there then the swing, Conservatives to Labour, of 2.4%. So obviously they'll be very pleased there in Mansfield. We're just going to take a breath because it's just gone 1 o'clock. Let's get the latest news with Luquesa Barak.
Joe, thank you. Joe, thank you very much. Well, early results from... Joe, thank you. Early results from England's local elections have seen gains for Labour and the Liberal Democrats at the expense of the Conservatives. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, admits that the results are disappointing for the Tories. Labour have taken control of councils such as Plymouth, Stoke-on-Trent and Medway, and say the results so far suggest they would win a majority at the next general election. The Lib Dems have won in Windsor and Maidenhead. Their leader, Sir Ed Davey, called the results groundbreaking.
It's still early, we've just had a quarter of the results in, but what I am going to carry on doing is delivering on the people's priorities.
What's this? Well, that was the Prime Minister giving his response to those disappointing results for the Conservatives earlier this morning. Labour, meanwhile, say the results set a strong course for the party at the next general election.
These are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election. A very, very good set of results for us.
And Ed Davey has been celebrating the Lib Dem successes. He's also looking ahead.
I think there's a chance now that we can have that general election within the next year. And I think the message is clear. The time's up
for Rishi Sunak and his appalling Conservative government.
The Electoral Commission, the body which regulates elections, has said that some people were unable to vote yesterday because they didn't have photo ID. Some campaigners say the new voter identity rules had brought about a dark day for democracy. The requirement was introduced as part of the Elections Act 2022 and requires voters in Great Britain, England, Wales and Scotland to provide photo ID before voting. It's been in place in Northern Ireland since 2007. Well, final preparations are currently underway ahead of tomorrow's coronation of King Charles III. The King and Queen Consort had their last rehearsal at Westminster Abbey earlier today. Charles III will also host a reception today for world leaders attending the crowning. Along the Mall, the crowds of loyal royalists have been growing. Tomorrow's ceremony will be the first coronation of a British monarch in 70 years. Meanwhile, one of the King's close friends says that the monarch wouldn't like the idea of people paying homage to him during the coronation. The public are being invited to swear allegiance to the King as part of the ancient ceremony. The Archbishop of Canterbury says the oath is voluntary, but the move has been criticised by some. Broadcaster and friend of King Charles, Jonathan Dimbleby, says it would be out of character for the King.
I can think of nothing that he would find more abhorrent. He's never wanted to be revered. He's never wanted, so far as I know, to have anyone pay homage to him except in mock terms as a joke. He wants, I think, to feel that people will share in the event. And I don't quite know how this might have happened.
Police in Serbia have arrested a man who's suspected of shooting dead 8 people in a town south of Belgrade. It's the country's second mass shooting in as many days after a boy killed 9 people at a school in Belgrade on Wednesday. The country's president has promised to tighten rules on possessing weapons. Authorities have released an image of the 21-year-old suspect. Police believe he shot the victims from his car shortly after midnight. The head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group has threatened to pull his frontline forces out of the fiercely contested town of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. Yevgeny Prigozhin claims that he'll pull his forces out next Wednesday, saying his men lack ammunition. He's also slammed Russia's defense minister. Moscow has been trying to capture the town since last year, with Wagner's fighters central in the assault. He's known for his savage attacks on the top brass, and it's unclear if the latest isn't just an empty threat. The World Food Programme has said that millions of dollars worth of food aid destined for Sudan has been looted since fighting broke out last month. The WFP said pillaging in the country is rampant. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden has issued an executive order authorizing sanctions against Sudan, saying the fighting must end. The latest ceasefire has failed to hold, with heavy fighting continuing in the capital Khartoum and neighbouring cities. Well, the streets of the Italian city of Naples were flooded with street parties after their football team, Napoli, won their first Serie A title for 33 years. The last time Napoli were champions was back in 1990, when they were captained by Diego Maradona. This time around, they secured the title with 5 matches still left to play. And just to remind you that you can find out all the election results in your area by heading to the BBC News website and simply inputting your postcode. That's it from me. Joe, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Luquesa. Let me bring you a result straight away, because it's a bad one for the Conservatives. East Staffordshire, we were talking about it before. We didn't have the full set of results. Well, Labour have gained it from the Conservatives. I think we can show you the number of seats that the Labour Party now has on East Staffordshire Council. They have 21 seats to the Conservatives' 15. It was a straightforward Conservative-Labour fight. But that is a bad result in an area like that, Andrea.
Yeah, well, you know, as I say, it's so disappointing for hardworking councillors, and really I'm incredibly sorry to them. And I think it does demonstrate that, as the Prime Minister has said, that he wants to really focus on delivering for what people have said they want, which is cutting inflation and growing the economy and cutting NHS waiting lists and stopping the small boats. And that is absolutely his focus.
A good win for Labour, Liz. I don't know if Labour was really expecting to actually gain that from the Conservatives, maybe to take some seats, but yes, you've got it.
Really positive, and we're hearing about making gains in Swindon and Erewash and North East Derbyshire, all areas that we have to win back to form the next government. I'm so proud of all of our councillors and our candidates. But we also know that there's no such thing as a coronation in politics.
Well, no, that's... no, but Solihull, for instance, I mean, we mentioned Solihull just before the news. Conservatives have held that. In fact, I think they increased the number of councillors they've got. Doubt. So in the Midlands, I mean, there are areas where Labour is not doing well. In a sense, we use this benchmark of 1995 because it was 2 years before that landslide election victory by Tony Blair. And you're still not at that sort of level, which did indicate that Labour was on the path to a majority.
Although in the areas that we need to win back to form the next government, if you look at, as we've already talked about, Medway and Plymouth, we're absolutely there. And in other seats, we're back to where we were in 2001, which is a huge step forward. But we know that there is more to do to convince people. And I would say for all of those people who underestimated Keir Starmer, when you see how much he has changed the party in such a short period of time. I mean, when I was growing up, my big political hero was Neil Kinnock, and everything that he did to change the Labour Party to get us back.
But he never did, of course, win a general election.
Actually, if you look at what Keir Starmer has done in just a couple of years, it took us 2, 3 or more electoral cycles in the past.
Why are people not more enthusiastic about him? There have been endless reports in the papers, on the airwaves, about, yes, fed up with the Conservatives, yes, we're going to trust Labour again. Still not convinced by Sir Keir Starmer. The polls sort of bear it out. Maybe it doesn't matter, but why do you think that is?
People see him, from my conversations on the doorstep, where people just tell you their gut reaction is they do believe he's a man of integrity. They do believe he's changed the party. But after, I cannot explain how catastrophic 2019 was, and how people believed that we had left the values of the British people. And that takes time to turn it round. And the fact that we have got to this stage now, I think, is a huge testament. But Keir Starmer would be the first person to say he is proud, but he is not satisfied, and we have further to go.
We want to go to Stratford-on-Avon, but did you want to comment specifically on Sir Keir Starmer?
I think it is clear that Keir Starmer has done a lot for the Labour Party, particularly on issues like anti-Semitism. But I think as we go closer to the general election, a lot more scrutiny is going to be made of him, how he completely U-turned on Brexit, trying to get Jeremy Corbyn into government, but also very recently tuition fees. You know, the fact that he dropped that, for a lot of young people, that was something that they could finally say there was going to be a party.
Well, he promised to scrap tuition fees, and now he is no longer going to do that.
Exactly. So there are a lot of issues that Keir Starmer has completely flip-flopped.
I will come back to this issue in just a moment, because it's true, Sir Keir Starmer has dropped many, if not most, of the pledges that he made when he was campaigning to be leader to replace Jeremy Corbyn. On pensions. Well, OK, we'll come back to that perhaps later on. I want to go to Stratford-on-Avon because we are waiting for a result there. Our reporter, Simon Gilbert, is there for the BBC. Simon, Liberal Democrats, very hopeful and confident even that they're going to take this.
Yeah. Absolutely. At this moment in time, it's 15 seats for the Liberal Democrats to the Conservative 7. There are 2 Greens. Now they need 21 in this new boundary council to secure power here in Stratford. Stratford, of course, is the home of Nadeem Zahawi, and that has been a big election issue here. We've seen that might be a bit of blowback to the Conservatives locally. Their decision to have their reselection of the parliamentary candidate Nadeem Zahawi here. So it's all to play for at the minute, but it looks like the Liberal Democrats are certainly making big strides at the moment.
Right. Do you know any sort of idea of a time when we might get that result? And I'll make a note.
Yes, well, we should be done in the next hour, really. One big result that I should let you know about here as well is that the leader of Stratford District Council actually lost his seats to the Liberal Democrats here in quite spectacular fashion as well. He got more than double the votes, the Liberal Democrats, than Tony Jefferson, the Conservative leader.
Right, and you've mentioned Nadeem Zahawi, the former Chancellor, and he resigned, quit over questions about his tax affairs. You say that was quite a big factor. Any other factors that have come into play in Stratford-on-Avon?
Well, I think it's pretty much a reflection of what we're seeing nationally, isn't it? I mean, any government that's been in power for as long as the Conservatives are always going to struggle to hold on to that power in local elections. It's the only way people can really express their displeasure, isn't it? But here in Stratford, I mean, it is unprecedented. We've never had any other party in control of this council other than the Conservatives since it was formed in the mid-1970s. So it would be quite an upset if the Lib Dems were to wrest control from the Conservatives here.
Right, Simon Gilbert, thank you very much. We'll probably come back to you within the hour if you have that result, but we'll announce it here first. Let's get a more general overview and dig down a little bit into what's been happening across the Midlands. David Wallace Lockhart is at the touchscreen for us. David.
So, Joe, here we've got the Conservative losses so far when it comes to councils, and you can see them flashing on the map here. So a real geographical spread of them, really. But we can delve into a few Midland seats and get an idea of what's going on there. So starting off in East Staffordshire, that one we just heard about, it's a Labour gain from the Conservatives. Now, this council had been Conservative since 2003, but we can see there are 19 seats needed for a majority, Labour getting 21. And this is once again fitting in with a pattern we're seeing in a number of councils of big Leave voting areas in 2016, 63% Leave vote in East Staffordshire at the 2016 Brexit referendum, but Labour making gains here. So perhaps Labour heartened by the fact they seem to be doing well in areas that voted for Brexit back in 2016, somewhere in recent years where they have been struggling. And we can have a look at what's changed seat-wise there. The Conservatives down by 8, Labour gaining 11. Now, we're expecting some more results coming in shortly. Let's go to Swindon in Wiltshire. Also Conservative since 2003, but it looks like Labour are making good gains here. 12 out of 19 seats counted so far, 29 needed for a majority. Labour getting close to that, and there's still a few to go, but they have increased their share compared to 2019, or their number of seats, by 8, whereas the Conservatives are down 9. Now, this is where Sir Keir Starmer launched Labour's local election campaign. He'd obviously love to turn it red and see the council become a Labour council. And looking ahead to any potential general election, Swindon is the sort of area where Labour would have to return MPs, you'd imagine, if they wanted to form the next government. We can have a look at share of the vote the parties have got here. 48% for Labour compared to 38% for the Conservatives. How does that compare to 2019? Well, Labour are up by 16%. The Conservatives are down by 11%. Where there's perhaps a bit more positive news for the Conservatives is in Solihull in the West Midlands. That's been Conservative since 2008. It's staying Conservatives. They got 29 out of 26 seats. We can have a look at any changes there. The Conservatives have actually managed to add to their seat tally compared to 2019, taking 2 seats. The Greens losing 1, Labour losing 1 as well. But let's have a look at where we stand currently in terms of seats. Of course, we're comparing here to 2019. Labour up by over 160. The Conservatives down by 285. They had predicted potential losses of 1,000. If that number does go higher than 1,000, then even their own expectation management, it would appear, was too optimistic. The Lib Dems obviously had a good overnight period and they've continued making gains throughout today. They're up by 75 seats. For councils changing hands, that means that Labour are up by 4, the Conservatives down by 14 councils, the Lib Dems up by 1. But plenty of seats still to councils still to be declared. Plenty of churn still to happen, you'd imagine, and we'll start getting a clearer and clearer picture as the day goes on.
Thank you very much, David. I think we can just show you Bromsgrove, actually, because on the seats that have declared so far, it's a Conservative loss. It's going to no overall control. You can see there that the Conservatives at the moment are on 10, Labour on 6, Independents on 6, Lib Dems on 4. We can see the seat change. Yes, the Conservatives have dropped by 5. Labour, Independents and Liberal Democrats have gained those seats. That, of course, is Bromsgrove is Sajid Javid. You remember that's his parliamentary seat. He's standing down, of course, very safe, presumably from a parliamentary point of view. But what do you make of that? A Conservative loss, though, at a local council. That will be making people nervous. If you're the MP, if you're the Conservative MP in areas where your council has slipped away from control, and it has been under Tory control for some time, it would make you nervous. Sajid Javid's going, I know, but it would.
I mean, as I've said, it's an incredibly disappointing night, and my heart goes out to those councillors who've lost their seats, and quite justifiably, they will be angry and upset at the impact of the national picture on the local council elections, totally justifiably. And what we need to do as Conservatives as a result of that is to re-galvanise our action and stick together.
Yeah, except, of course, it does reduce your capacity, doesn't it, from a campaigning point of view. I mean, the Liberal Democrats have always talked about the bedrock of their party. It was, of course, decimated after the coalition with the Conservatives, but being the bedrock of your campaigning, of your foot soldiers going out there, leafleting, doing all that, and there are going to be so many, so far fewer of them.
Well, that is true, but that is to assume that it's only councillors who do the work. And actually,
I don't only assume.
The networks are huge. Well, and in fact, in lots of areas, I've been recently campaigning in Bedford, Milton Keynes, North Warwickshire. Young people out in their droves, really, getting round the patch speedily, which is fantastic.
Well, they're going to have to. They're going to be even busier, aren't they? With their fewer of them.
Getting your steps in, though, Jo.
Yeah, well,
very important.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yes.
I mean, Liz,
33,000 steps.
Oh, congratulations! Well, you've both been quite sedentary for the last hour. I'm sorry about that.
But Liz, these high heels.
Well, exactly. To get back to, of course, the serious, no, not at all, serious issue of politics on this issue of leave areas that voted leave. We talked about East Staffordshire. I could see there 63% voted to leave. Do you think you have neutralised that issue? It was difficult, as Anaya said, for Sir Keir Starmer because of his position when Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader over the idea of a second referendum. This is going back in history. But do you think the Labour Party could have perhaps been warmer to the idea of closer relations with the EU? Now it seems that's...
I think that question is over. It's done. And I think Keir's been very clear about that, and that's very important. We've shown where we want to try and fix problems with the deal, that will try and make things easier for businesses in this country, but we're not going back on that. And to be winning back in areas that voted leave is hugely important for us. But what I would say is, let's come back to the issue raised before, is about people wanting change. They do want to see the economy working for them, that the benefits come to ordinary working people, not just a few at the top. Well, we have made big strides forward. Rachel Reeves, Pat McFadden, Keir Starmer in making sure that people understand we don't think it's our money, it's their money, and that we understand people need to trust Labour with their money, but there's more to do.
One of the unresolved issues for Brexit that I think Labour are still very weak on, even the Tories have their problems, is around the issue of immigration. And I mean, it is still a thorny issue, but the boats issue is not the only one that people are concerned about. Net migration is now at 700,000, which is double.
Is it at 700,000? The last figure I thought was about 540,000, but maybe it's gone up.
Well, it is substantially higher than when the Conservatives got into government, and they had the promise of cutting it down to tens of thousands. That's completely out of the water, and the Labour Party just don't even talk about that issue. So when we talk about whether or not Brexit is closed, that was still a massive question around Brexit. How do we control our borders?
Well, let's stick with this idea of Brexit, because it was such a defining issue, both in the local elections and in the general election in 2019. But this is interesting, John. Key ward analysis on high leave vote change since 2019, and we'll do the high remain vote in a moment. And you can see Labour have added 8% since 2019 in those areas that voted strongly to leave. a little bit like the areas of East Staffordshire, and they've won the mayoralty in Middlesbrough, in the Tees Valley, and the Tories are down. So independents there, you can see, are down by 40%, and that will be UKIP, as was at the time, then obviously the Brexit Party, and now, to some extent, the Reform Party. It's changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, and after 2019, remember when there was those results, and there were lots of people saying that they'd never voted anything other than Labour in their lives, and then they'd voted Tory for the first time. And it felt like there had been some sort of realignment, that it was going to be really hard for Labour to be able to win those areas back. But you look at some of those vote figures, you look at some of those individual seats in Brexit-supporting areas where a lot of people may have voted UKIP last time. And a lot of those voters who'd left UKIP, left Labour and gone to UKIP or gone to the Tories, now a lot of them do seem to be coming back again. And I struggle to see how the Tories really kind of bring the Brexit issue back onto the table. For a lot of people, I think it feels quite irrelevant now. And I struggle to see how you make that a live issue in an election campaign.
Well, I mean, Andrea, let's just look at the High Remain vote. This is key ward analysis, changes since 2019. Again, Labour there are up 4%. The Lib Dems down 1%, and you can see the figures, the Conservatives down by 2%. I mean, if you have a look at something like the projected national share from 2021, following on from 2019, this is the national share if everyone was voting on the day in local elections. I mean, the Conservatives were ahead then, but that's all changed.
Well, I think, as you said earlier, Jo, Brexit is now quite a distance away, and so
that's a
as an
disadvantage
issue,
for the Tories.
well, yes, of course it is. I mean, there's no doubt that the 2019 general election was because people were sick and tired of the fact that they'd told the government, they'd been asked, what do you want us to do? They said, leave the EU, and then we didn't do it. And the reason we didn't do it, it's gone now, but the reason we didn't do it is, of course, because we had a hung parliament. And that actually, it is, as Anaya rightly points out, it was Keir Starmer and Liz and all of the Labour Party who were preventing.
But that's changed. That's what we're saying.
Exactly.
And that's going to make it very hard for the Conservatives.
And it makes it harder for us. And that's, you know, but nevertheless, there is still the fact that we have left the European Union. There is that opportunity of that brilliant free trading relationships around the world that will be the future for growth for the UK, whether it's in green industrial sectors, whether it's in
but not being recognised in these local elections in areas where they voted very heavily for leave.
Exactly right, because Brexit itself isn't an issue. What I'm saying is that as a result of the time lag between us voting to leave the EU and us actually leaving the EU, what we haven't seen yet is the advantage, those sunlit uplands of leaving the EU. And that is going to take time.
You want to make it work too.
Some of those are the opportunity for green jobs.
Well, let's see what's Labour going to do.
We definitely haven't seen many sunlit uplands.
But are you going to make them? Are you going to make them happen, these sunlit uplands? Because you're going to make Brexit work.
There are definitely things that we need to sort out, whether it's on access for our creative industry, which is hugely important.
The Windsor Framework. Do you support the Windsor Framework from the government?
Professional services. I mean, we want to get, sort out what's happened in Northern Ireland. But on professional services, which we are really world leaders in, we think we could get mutual recognition on that, which would benefit.
That's what we're working on at the moment.
Well, I mean, you're working on an awful lot of things, but just not delivering on them.
But what makes you think Labour would get a better deal in that sense?
We are focused on the reality and the details of a negotiation, not political posturing. And I think that's
not credible, Liz.
I don't think
that's not credible. The Parliamentary Partnership
Andrea,
let her finish and you can come in. You can
Andrea,
come in. You say why you don't think it's credible.
The reality is, we have not got growth in our economy.
No.
Andrew is not promising anything different. And even as a result of what Jeremy Hunt said at the last budget, the predicted growth is at best anemic. It's not good enough. We have a plan on growing for clean energy, creating the jobs we need for the future, sorting out the problems with the Brexit.
A plan on clean energy.
I mean, you've announced so much.
We're half the world's offshore deployed wind. That is half the entire world's offshore deployed wind already. The UK has cut CO2 emissions since 2010 by more than any advanced European economy.
If you would just allow, you've announced
You're denying the track record, Liz, which is just not true.
You're denying me a chance to talk because you think if you talk over me that you'll shut me down. But the truth is, The Conservatives announce an awful lot of plans that don't work. We see that on the NHS. Their flagship programme to cut waiting times, £750 million to tackle delayed discharges.
Well,
hardly any people out of hospital as a result of that.
But you would admit, Liz,
We
that
have
you
a
are
plan
not,
to
but
deal
you
with
don't
it.
have a plan, a transformative plan for the NHS in terms of money. Now, it may not always be about money. You've certainly talked about the money you would raise to recruit more doctors and nurses. But I've had colleagues of yours here, Chris Bryant, I think, was the most recent one, the Labour MP, saying, actually, maybe we are just going to have to raise more money from taxation to put into public services to transform them.
If you think money alone is the solution...
But you would admit money is important for the NHS.
Of course, and that is why we've said we will scrap the non-dom tax status to put into our workforce.
Yeah.
But the reform programme is about how do you keep people fit and healthier for longer, living in their own homes so they don't end up in hospital.
All right.
That's about reforming services around people. So I don't believe that the key to tackling all the problems in our public services is money alone. It's investment and reform.
All right.
And our reform plans are what people are supporting to help keep people, whether it's in the NHS, in our schools, breakfast clubs, vital to giving kids the best start in life. Investment and reform is where we'll be focusing on over the coming months.
We've talked, understandably, a lot about the economy because the cost of living is probably the #1 concern for most voters. Just to bring it back to local elections and local people voting in these elections in England, there was a big discussion before they were held about voter ID. These are the first set of elections that you would need to have some sort of photographic identity to bring along before you actually cast your vote. Labour were worried that it might disenfranchise groups of people that didn't have photo ID. Now, it's very difficult because it's anecdotal to some extent, but we do have some firm figures. Maidstone, actually returning officers, said 137 people turned up without the right requisite photo ID. 122 of them, I think, is correct, came back with the right ID, but that's 20 or so not. Is this going to be a big issue, this vote?
Well, I think it's a massive shame if someone is bothered to leave their house.
Yeah, and you've got to be quite dedicated in a local
exactly, especially in a local election campaign. If people have been willing to leave their house, go to a polling station, turn up to vote, and then they were turned away, then I think that is a real tragedy. And you look at some of those anecdotal stories from overnight. One of Labour's candidates in Milton Keynes was tweeting about how a nurse had turned up at the end of her long shift. She turned up, she tried to use her NHS ID, and she was told that wasn't acceptable. I think that is a real shame. And I think there are real questions about why ID and travel cards for young people weren't accepted, but they were accepted for over 60s.
What do you think, Anaya? Do you think it should be dropped? I mean, the Electoral Commission obviously want to wait and see, you know, what information they get. They were the ones that have enacted this recommended it.
Yeah, they recommended it, and there is undoubtedly going to be some teething problems in the beginning. But the reality is, I mean, the voter ID is a solution looking for a problem. There isn't massive voter fraud going on across the country. There's been small pockets in particular areas that have particular issues that we can focus on and deal with. But the idea that this is needed and was some urgent thing, I think, is just not.
I mean, it's appalling. I think it is more than a shame. It is disenfranchisement, and that is un-British. I had a woman
It is in Northern Ireland, though.
It is. Yes, it is. It is, and has been for quite. Has been. I was going to say it's been in for quite some time.
Can you imagine trying to do that now?
Can I say now? A woman who she doesn't drive, she can't afford to have a car. She can't afford to renew her passport and doesn't need to because she can't afford to go on holiday either. She's got 3 kids. She didn't apply online to get the vote. She could not vote. That is wrong. That is wrong, and it needs to be sorted out.
I mean, the numbers at the moment perhaps wouldn't change the results. I mean, I'm really speculating. No, I take your point. But the point that you might not be able to vote and you had bothered to go, Andrea, what do you think of this idea?
I think it is exactly right. It's a tragedy if you can't vote. However, I don't agree that it's a solution looking for a problem, because the reality is, by definition, we don't know how big a problem voter fraud is. What we do know, however,
is... You think it's quite small?
We don't know, because by definition, how can you know?
Well, true, but I think the Electoral Commission has done some figures on both sides.
OK, but the key point about this is if you have voter ID, then you create confidence in the system.
Now
now you're talking over me. So when I'm out on the streets, you've done it a lot, Liz. And I'm just
all right, you finish your point.
But the point is that on doorsteps, people who care about the issue of voter ID have said to me, anecdotes, absolutely, that actually the confidence in the system is what is critical. And we've seen after lots of general elections, as well as local elections, stories about people being encouraged to vote twice, stories about people collecting up all of the postal votes in their household and putting all those through. So actually creating confidence in the system. Also, Tony Blair introduced it only for Northern Ireland in 2003, an extraordinary thing to do. Most European countries use voter ID. It seems to me something that is essential.
Do you think it's just the time now that it's going to come? It's a sort of inevitability. Well, it has come, obviously, on this occasion, that it's going to stay, Liz?
I don't know. I mean, even David Davis said there's been one prosecution in the last decade. I think it is your right to vote. I don't think there's been big concern about, lack of confidence in the system. And what I worry about, from what I have seen myself and from other candidates in the East Midlands, is often older women, maybe unwell, poorly, frail, don't know about the internet. I think it's wrong.
Well, that's interesting because actually, I remember when we talked about it on Politics Live, when the idea was first mooted, that there was worry that actually it'd be younger people who wouldn't be able to vote. Now, traditionally, of course, they're not the highest group to turn out to vote, unfortunately, in local elections. But there weren't as many forms of photo ID that young people have compared to older people. But you think it's older people, actually, are the ones
that...
Should they expand?
For free.
Andrea, people don't. People don't.
Yes, but people have to go onto the electoral roll in the first place, John, don't they?
But that you get a letter through the door, that is very quick. That is different from knowing what on earth a voter authority certificate is and how you apply for it.
I don't think it is unreasonable for people to get some form of ID. There's so many different ways in which you need it, whether a driving licence, alcohol,
Labour were keen on ID
so
cards at one stage,
Yeah, so I don't think it's such a kind of marginalisation to ask for that. I think the biggest problem is that voter fraud is not a massive problem in this country. And actually, I'm not saying this is what the Conservatives are doing, but there's been a lot of rhetoric in America, for example, around voter fraud and trying to kind of suggest that this is a big issue. And I worry about that kind of rhetoric, which seems to bolster particular political
But we had
parties.
a 93-year-old in the paper this week called Una Priest in Leominster. She's got cancer. She didn't know about the change. Do you really think it's reasonable to expect her to be able to get photo ID so she can go to a polling station and vote? She's someone who has voted every time she could since she was 18.
Why are we making it harder
she was denied
to
a vote?
We want to encourage
Should it be looked
people
at?
to
Should it be
vote.
looked at? And should the forms of ID be expanded? Right.
Of course. Now, the issue with young people's ID, as we know, is that is quite easy to fake an age. I mean, that just is the case. And that's... So there are genuine problems with certain forms of ID.
But old people's ID, you can't fake it.
But, well,
I mean, it's the same thing.
I totally agree with you, John. What I'm talking about is not that the system's perfect, let's not change it. Of course it'll be reviewed by the Electoral Commission, who, let's not forget, asked for this to be put in place in the first place.
Andrea has
and it does need to be reviewed.
Well, interestingly, I'm being told the poll showed the public agreed with the idea of voter ID by 2 to 1. So, I mean, polls, obviously, but that does seem to show public support. Well, maybe not.
She wanted to vote.
I suppose increasing numbers of people can vote by post.
Her right was taken away.
Well,
her right was taken away.
I mean, it sounds like there should be a discussion, a further 100%. Discussion as a result of having used it in the first place. I'm going to bring you a sort of overall tally in just a moment. But the councils that we've been watching this afternoon, I mean, we're watching them all, of course, but Swindon, that key target for the Labour Party, looks as if it's going to be a Labour gain. We can't confirm that just at the moment, although it just seems to have popped up as a Labour gain. So it's literally just dropped. As I speak, that result has come in. Swindon, Labour's got it. So throwing the kitchen sink at it was where Keir Starmer launched the Labour campaign. It's gone to Labour. Tunbridge Wells, you can see, hung. West Oxfordshire hung. There are a whole list of councils. So we can see there the Labour gain from the Conservatives has put Labour on 29 council seats there. The Conservatives on 22. It was a straightforward fight, and it's gone to Labour. It's flipped from the Conservatives to Labour. Increase of 8, and the Conservatives lost 9. Still 4 to declare, but it is Labour's. Liberal Democrats have gone 1. Brilliant, of course, course, says Liz. How important do you think something like Swindon, key target where they launched, is in the psyche of the Labour Party?
I think really important. Is clearly one of those bellwether seats, and it's one of those, you know, Labour's obviously been very strong across many parts of the country for a long time, but you look at those maps when we see all the seats across the country, and there has been an absence of that many seats in the south outside of London. And so if they can start to pick up places like this, there's many other councils that we're expecting the votes on later, places like Norwich, places like Dover. I think that will be a real test. And, you know, people keep saying on TV, on this programme, on other things, there isn't a groundswell of support for Keir Starmer. But you just need to start looking at these results. Look at those councillors going up and up and up. What are those people voting for if it isn't for Keir Starmer?
Andrea?
I mean, I absolutely take what John says. You know, if Labour vote is going up, you have to assume that they are voting for Labour as led by Keir Starmer. But the polls also show that Rishi Sunak as a leader is much more popular than Keir Starmer is. And
look at the results. He's not. People don't want him.
We've not come back to it, but as you said, Joe, there will be much more scrutiny on Labour and the Labour leadership. And I do want to just raise this point about this lifetime allowance for pensions, where Labour were absolutely clutching their throats over that lifetime allowance being lifted, only to find, hey-ho, that there was an actual law passed to enable...
Passed by who? Passed by who? Who was in government?
Keir
the
Starmer
Tories.
To have his
Passed by you, Andrea.
No, but we are the ones lifting the lifetime allowance.
On this lifetime allowance, do you think this is a very pertinent issue? Do you think that's a very pertinent issue, these elections?
Well, not not in these local elections, no. But the point is that as we get closer to a general election, you're asserting that this is a precursor to the general election.
We're questioning that, and we have to be careful about saying this is a precursor. And actually, but it has reminded me, Liz, of what I said earlier, actually, which is Keir Starmer's campaign pledges. Yes, it was 2020, following from the resignation of Jeremy Corbyn. But he has moved away, well, dropped key pledges, and they've certainly been housed from the left of the Labour Party and many activists. The idea of he is no longer going to oppose tuition fees, that he isn't going to nationalise some of the main utilities, that he isn't going to increase taxes on the top 5% of earners. These are key principles. There could be a trust issue here.
I don't think at all he has changed his key principles. Well, not at all.
They are key pledges, aren't they? Tax the top earners to pay for public services, nationalise major utilities and tuition fees. Well, we know how that ended.
Scrapping the non-dom tax status.
Well, what about scrapping tuition fees? Because that was a promise that he made.
I think he is right to say if the circumstances have changed and the state of the economy is such that we are careful with people's money. And actually, the language of priorities is the religion of socialism, and we have to take difficult decisions. And I actually think that the public does want to look at us and say, you can't pay for everything all at once. They do want to know what your priorities are, and he is saying the circumstances have changed. I do want a fairer deal for students, but we're going to have a different approach. I do want to see the very top earners, like the non-doms. If you come and live and work in this country, you should pay your taxes here. Let's use that for the NHS.
Briefly, Anna, we've got about 20 seconds.
Haven't changed, but if the reality changes,
I
think, need a different...
Let's look at the Tory manifesto and what's been kept from that. That was a promise to voters, not kept.
I think what this is revealing is that the Labour Party are benefiting from a dissatisfaction of the Tory party.
More than that.
And actually, when there is scrutiny about the kinds of policies that the Labour Party want to advocate for, I think there's going to be much more questions about
Well, on that point, there is so much more to discuss, but sadly, not with this wonderful panel of guests, because I'm going to thank Andrea Leadsom, Liz Kendall, John Stevens, and Lauren Iman. Thank you very much for keeping us company. And viewers, we're going to go to David Wallace Lockhart for some more analysis. David.
So we've been talking about what's happened in areas with a high Leave vote in 2019, Joe. And in 2019, both the Conservatives and the Labour Party had a bad set of local elections, and it was quite often the independents who benefited from that. And this tells a story here. We can see independents down 14% and Labour benefiting from that quite a bit. So let's look at a few seats in a bit more detail. Stoke-on-Trent in Staffordshire. Of course, Labour have won this council. It's a Labour gain. When we talk about the House of Commons, this would be that red wall territory, traditional Labour seats that went Conservative at the 2019 general election. But here for the council, Labour have got it back. They got 29 seats, a 69% leave vote in the EU referendum in Stoke-on-Trent. But the Labour vote has gone up by 14 seats, and of course it's that independent seats that seem to have fallen away. Now we can go to Medway, different geographically on the Kent coast, but similar in terms of Brexit vote, 64% leave. And of course this is where Keir Starmer has been celebrating today, Labour taking the council from the Conservatives. This had been a Conservative council since 2003. Labour hadn't been in power since 1998. They gained 11 councillors, the Conservatives lost 13. Now, we were just talking about Swindon, a key battleground in these local elections. Labour have taken it from the Conservatives. Once again, this has been a Conservative council since 2003. Will be a big battleground, you'd imagine, at the next general election. Labour getting 29 seats. There's still counting going on there, but they have got those 29. You need to get a majority on the council. They've gone up by 8 councillors so far. The Conservatives going down by 9. We can have a look at vote share. Labour 51%, the Conservatives 35%. Now, perhaps an area, the change there, Labour up by 13%. Perhaps an area where Labour haven't done as well, a leave voting area, would be Peterborough. And this is somewhere that Rishi Sunak has been holding up as one of the areas he's trying to say Labour have underperformed. But of course, he's got to pick some areas to say that when he's dealing with this bad set of results. So it was a leave area. Conservatives coming out with a hung council there, coming just one short of the 31 needed for a majority. Let's have a look at the change. The reason Rishi Sunak is pointing to this particular council is the Conservatives have gone up by 1, Labour down by 2. But if we have a look at vote share, 35% for the Conservatives, 32% for Tory, for the Labour Party, sorry. But then if we look at actually the change in shares, although the Conservatives may have gained a seat, they've gone up by 3% on 2019, whereas the Labour Party have gone up by 4%. So this is what Rishi Sunak is having to point to as perhaps some Conservative success. We get an idea of how difficult a position he's trying to sell. Here's where the councillor numbers sit currently. Obviously looking quite bad for the Conservatives, quite good for Labour and the Lib Dems so far.
David Wallace Lockhart, thank you very much, and we'll come back to you later on in the programme. It's been a busy afternoon so far. Results have come tumbling in. It has been a bad night and continue to be bad for the Conservatives. We'll bring you more, though, later on as more key results come in. The Politics Live special continues through until 4:30 this afternoon, but we're moving from BBC 2 now to BBC 1. Please join us there in a few moments' time.